But let me just say, I think that the parallel that you drew, the positive parallel that you drew, is really useful. That we are seeing Americans protest right now against what the Trump administration is doing. And one of the things that didn't happen in 1942, when Japanese Americans were being thrown out of their homes, rounded up, put on buses, put on trains, and taken to detention centers, and then taken to prison camps, which FDR called concentration camps. One of the things that didn't happen was, mass street protests, other Americans turning out and saying, stop, we're not going to stand for this. And yes, there was a lot else going on in 1942 when we were just into the war and we were losing the war, and there was a huge mobilization happening. But when more than 100,000 Americans were incarcerated this way, essentially in defiance, an open defiance of the Constitution, most Americans did not peep. And so this is the story of the regret of a country that didn't stop it when we could have, the way that we investigated it, apologized for it, literally paid reparations, but also the stories of the truly unique people who did stand up. It took a special kind of person, and that means it's, for me at least, looking back on it, a special kind of role model for what it means to not go along to get along, to actually recognize when something's wrong, stand up and object. Even if you don't think you can stop it, it matters when you object and when you try to mitigate the harm.
Look, I gotta be real with y'all. What Trump is doing right now, it ain't just about deportations. There's something way bigger going on here, and nobody's talking about it.
The History Books or Rachel Maddow podcast will certainly talk about it, which is important for people to remember how they will be looked at in history. One of the other parallels, it seems, but I want to know your thoughts on this. You've done such a beautiful job explaining it. Is the legal pushback? I mean, as you noted, I mean, the pushback was effective, small but mighty, but effective in some ways, even though a lot of people didn't participate in it. And we're seeing a bigger version of that now publicly, but we're also seeing a lot of legal pushback today. I mean, just today, a judge ordered U.S. troops get out of Los Angeles. There's so many cases out there of different legal groups standing up for people who are being detained. Tell us, obviously, the courts were a bit different then, but talk to us a little bit about the legal pushback around the time of Japanese incarceration, how you think that compares to the role the courts are playing now.
It's a really interesting point of comparison. So the heroes of Burn Order are Japanese Americans who brought cases that challenged the incarceration, who brought them all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the thriller aspect of the podcast is that there was essentially a crime perpetrated by the government in defending against those cases and defending the incarceration policy. They withheld evidence from the court, which lawyers are not allowed to do, the government is not allowed to do. And the uncovering of that crime, of that government misconduct, is an incredibly thrilling story that it takes all sorts of interesting characters to unwind over decades. But, the courts essentially greenlit this because they took the government's word for it when the government didn't deserve to be trusted on this. And we see a lot of parallels to that right now with the Trump administration in court telling judges things that the judges palpably can't believe and that aren't true and that are disproven. The presumption of regularity, we keep hearing about that. When the government lies to the courts, it clears the way for the courts to essentially greenlight things that are things that the country will regret. And I think one of the most corrosive things the Trump administration is doing, particularly around the way it's treating immigrants, is lying to the courts about what they're doing. And that puts both the courts and the government and the victims of these policies in absolutely untenable positions that will be vindicated by history and that will ruin a lot of lives on both sides of these fights over the course of these issues as they play out.
The way they're arguing things in courts and some of the people they're putting in courts to argue them, I would also say, is so emboldened, feels much more emboldened than the first term and different to me. And I think you alluded to that, too. And it also feels like Trump himself is more emboldened in terms of what he's willing to say publicly. I mean, I just talked about how back during the first term, he felt the need to deny that he used the phrase S-hole countries in the first term. I'm just, you could say the word, but I'm not going to say it right now. And last night, he he shouted it into the microphone. It feels just so different, even though as we look at kind of how the public is responding to the xenophobia and racism, it's not positively. What do you make of this and why he feels so emboldened to be this way?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's a challenge for us in the media, and it's a challenge for us as citizens right now, because I feel like so much of the way that we interact with people who have those kinds of views or who express those kinds of sentiments is that we try to nail them for it. We try to prove that Trump actually said it. We try to, get that reporting in the first term that he said this behind closed doors, and we try to assess the validity of his denials. Well, that's the kind of reporting you do when they have at least the shame that leads them to only do this behind closed doors. When they're doing it out loud, our receipt of that information, our sort of analysis of that information, the way we make sense of it, has to instead be, well, why is he doing it? What is this for? And just like those Western state governors whose language you alluded to in that clip from Burn Order, I mean, these guys only do these things for one reason, right? You are trying to blame a scapegoat for everything that's wrong in the country so that you're not held accountable for it. You're trying to turn people in this country against each other so that they blame each other. They see some group of people in this country as inhuman. That then justifies inhumane treatment toward them, which justifies radical government powers that the Constitution says we're not supposed to have. When you talk about people as rats and rabbits, and you talk about them being unassimilable and responsible for all the crime and all these other things that we're hearing from the Trump administration now openly, all they are trying to do is pave the way for authoritarian powers for themselves, for emergency powers toward an inhuman set of scapegoats that's supposed to justify anything they want to do. It's augmenting their own powers at the expense of a scapegoat, and it's the authoritarian playbook back to the very beginning of time. When they're doing it openly, we need to change our analysis to recognize what they're using it for and not just point out that they're saying it.
All right, y'all, that's the breakdown. I tried to keep it real and show you both sides of this whole situation. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think is really going on? Is Trump just enforcing the law? Or is there something deeper happening here? Drop your thoughts in the comments and keep it respectful, all right? We can disagree without being disrespectful. If this video helped you understand what's going on, smash that like button. It really helps the channel out. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button and the bell so you don't miss the next one. Until next time, fam, stay informed, stay woke, and I'll catch y'all in the next video. Peace.